Hello, and you're very welcome to the Town End podcast. It's season 4, episode 30, and what was a very disappointing night in Oriel Park. It was set up for the fairy tale. It was King Kenny returning. It was Prince Kenny there to steal the show. It was John Daly against his former employers. Everything was sitting there. First half, it's great. Everything goes according to plan, but unfortunately, much like this season, it all went off the rails in the second half. And to go through tonight's game, we have a real special guest. Please welcome back to the pod, Pingu. How are you, pal?
Yeah.
You
Well,
come in on these times. It's like,
I know.
it's like in case of emergency, we break you out of a glass, pal.
Break the glass. There's something going on behind the scenes. We need Pingu to talk about 2012 again. Look, I think you summed it up very, very well there. Game couldn't have started any better, and it was like the prince taking the throne from the king, wasn't it? With Owen Kenny finally getting a goal. I think it's something that all Dundalk fans wanted, and then just it sums up the season. It sums up what feels like the last 5 years.
Yeah,
where it's just you think you're getting somewhere, and then the next thing it falls to bits. And on another night in another season, 2-1 a 2-1 defeat to Pats isn't a bad result, but I think it's just it's very sad. Like, everything's very sad at the minute, isn't it? It's just I heard from people that were at the game tonight that just the atmosphere was akin to a morgue up around Oriel Park, and
definitely at times, yeah.
It's I don't know. I might not be the best person to be on tonight because I'm kind of lost for words at the minute, Chris. It's just very, very disappointing.
Yeah, look, I think we'll definitely address the elephant in the room very, very shortly on this, because that's, like you say, in particular in the second half, I think, the sense of fear around Oriel Park was palpable. But for Owen Kenny, he gets the nod to be up front on his own. One thing we saw tonight, Pingu, was a bit of a weapon in Dan Pike from his long throws. But it shows a bit of bravery from Owen to get in amongst it as well and go and get that goal.
Yeah, and I'm sure for a young player like Owen, it's probably a nervy night, going up against not just your dad, but going up against Stephen Kenny, a Stephen Kenny team, and you're kind of been tasked with leading the line. And it's obviously been the story of our season that we've been lacking goals in that area. He obviously scored against Bows in pre-season, and had looked lively in that game. I think it was Bows that he played against.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked.
And the Drogheda game that he scored, we lost 2-1.
And he looked lively, and anytime he's came on, he's looked relatively lively as well. So, to your point, the bravery, that throw in from Pike definitely seems to be a bit of a danger. He's a danger both ends of the pitch. But
could be a bit of that, all right.
I'll let you talk about that later. I'll not throw anyone under the bus. But no, look, it was a great throw in, and Kiki kind of nodded it down or nodded it on into the middle. And if you're a striker, you have to be in those positions. It reminded me, just when I was watching it back before we came on, it reminded me, like, they're the positions where, am I allowed to mention former strikers that are still playing?
I think so, yeah.
I'll not mention them by name, but a certain number 9 that used to play for the club, like, that's the kind of goals that he was known for. So I'm not trying to put added pressure on young Kenny to say that that's where he's going, but it's nice to have a striker pop up in that kind of position and get one of those kind of goals, because they're the opportunities that we've been missing all season.
Yeah, his dad did say in his post-match interview that there might not be any breakfast tomorrow for him for scoring that goal against him. But would you just go so far as to say maybe a brave choice in lineup? We talked about Sean Keogh last week, that maybe just a bit of naivety of being the wrong side of the attacker in Shells, and he went for John Mountney at left back just for a bit of stability and a bit of probably a bit more commanding in that back line, especially, like, we'll get onto it, like, at times the keeper's kicking was putting us under pressure tonight. So you think John Daly probably has seen those frailties in defence and thought you're better off, instead of a young lad in Sean Keogh getting the extra expertise and knowledge of John Mountney into that back four?
Yeah, I think we're probably at that stage of the season where you're in try your best not to lose and hope for a win territory, and he's probably just trying to get that little bit of stability. We all know in previous years here, time even at Pats before his injury, that he's the ultimate utility player. If you told John to probably stick on a pair of gloves and play in nets, I'd say he probably would, that kind of way. So you could put him anywhere and he'd give you a solid performance for the most part. So I think part of it with Daly as well is like he's obviously inherited a struggling squad. He's got some players in, obviously since he's came in, he's been able to get some players in, but it seems to me like he still doesn't know his best 11, and he's still figuring it out. That every week it seems to be a bit of a change, and you could have this conversation: is he being brave in his decision, or is he just trying to figure out what's going to get us over the line here?
Yeah.
Which he still needs to figure that out, obviously, after tonight. But that's kind of where I see that is he probably is looking for a bit of stability, but I think he's looking for what his strongest 11 is going to be now for the next 7 games that's left.
Yeah. I suppose if you're in the position Dundalk, John Daly would have been delighted going in at half time 1-0 up. Just before half time, you mentioned already, Oriel Park got a little flat because Pats got back into the game. In the start of the second half, I felt it kind of started that same way again, leading to the equaliser then shortly after. Do you feel sometimes some of that silence, Pingu, might be down to everything else that's happening at the club as well, and a doubt falling into supporters' minds?
I'm sure it is. I mean, I was getting texts from people as they were entering the ground, saying that the kind of air around the place was a bit kind of off anyway. So what you would have hoped would have obviously been after Owen Kenny got the goal, that it would have it would have lifted the crowd, and it did for a while. But obviously when it gets quiet, it's probably a little bit about what's happening on the pitch as well. If to your point, if Pats are getting back into, or if we're falling off a little bit, then of course the supporters are going to get nervy. And I feel like what's happening on the pitch isn't helping the supporters off the pitch to kind of get behind it. You're at that stage, and again, it's very reminiscent of. We don't even have to look back to 2012. We can even look at, was it 2021, where you score a goal or you go a goal up, but you're waiting for the mistake to come. Like, it's coming at some point, and unfortunately, it did come. And I think that's probably what's playing into the change in atmosphere throughout the matches as well. Is something is coming down the road, and it's coming pretty soon.
We talk about refereeing a fair bit when we're talking about this league and on the games here. Darrell Horgan was clearly upset with the concession of the free kick. He felt it was just a shoulder-to-shoulder charge. It's unfortunate, and you just mentioned it there. When we make that mistake, so far this year, we just keep getting punished from it, and they score from that free kick. Then it's never a free kick, and I think Darrell was right. And when you're down in these positions, you just don't get the rub of the green. Sure, you don't.
No, and it reminds me. I think it was the last time I was on the pod. I think Bowes played somebody and had the worst free kick that I've ever seen, and I actually think Pats bested Bowes to the worst free kick that I've ever seen. But somehow they managed to, and again, it comes off of where we're at right now. That I feel as though we just didn't know how to defend it. Like, it was a terrible. Like, when you actually watch it back, it was a god awful free kick. Like,
shocking.
But somehow they got the touch, and it went over. And to be fair it was a Trivoli, I think is his name.
Travosti,
yeah, it was a fucking great finish. Like, you know what I mean? But
if it's going to hit Jad Hikiki, you expect that sort of ball to kind of bounce and end up at the halfway line, but it goes spiraling up into the air, like exactly. and right to a Pats player, and that's our season all over, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just you're in this moment now where kind of anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and as I say, they managed to score from the absolute worst free kick that I've seen this season. So it's just poor defending. It seems like the players just aren't switched on, and I don't know if, again, that just that doubt is creeping in that area. But from a nothing free kick to concede like that is just it's just not good.
Yeah, and especially you're 10 minutes into the second half. I suppose John Daly is probably saying, right, for the next 10-15 minutes, guys, we shut up shop and we don't concede anything just see this out. And, you could see a bit of pressure starting to come from Pats at that stage. And once they had scored, Stephen Kenny was talking about Mason Melia, in his pre-match conversation, and saying, he's chomping at the bit, ready to come on. And he had some Irish commitments this week as well, which kind of probably stopped him from starting. And I'd say Stephen Kenny probably smelled blood in the water as well. Once they had got that equaliser, and he takes Aidan Keena off and he puts Mason Melia on, and he goes and gets the winner from another brave moment, another flick on, and Mason Melia is brave to get in there. And it's it's one of those things I think you could see coming as well, and it's impossible to stop.
Yeah, it's again. Defending was atrocious. You can't really say much more about that. It was just again the fear. I think that's the biggest thing, the fear of conceding, legal to conceding. When we look back at some of the best defenders that we've had in our lifetime as a club, these are lads that played without that fear, and it just seems that they're afraid of conceding, and when you do that, you're going to make mistakes. I wish our friend of the show, Stephen McKevitt, was on just to even give his take on it too, in all seriousness. But yeah, it was just a very, very poor goal to concede, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We won't go too much further into the game, because I'd like to bring in Dundalk Democrats' Niall Newmery. Niall, yes, you are there. Didn't think you were there for a second. Niall, we just touched on the goals itself there, and the two Pats goals. Just quickly, how did you see the game tonight?
Well, thanks for having me on again, lads. I think in fairness, if you're going to talk about the game itself, I mean, in isolation, Dundalk came out of the blocks very quickly, and obviously all the outside noise that's kind of gone around in the past few days didn't seem to affect him too much in the early stages. I think, Owen Kenny was superb in that first half and got his first, what a fitting match to get his first, supposedly goal, or first Premier Division goal in against a team managed by his father. Look, we had chances to maybe get further goals there. Obviously, the goalkeeper, very suspect for Dundalk, Goddard, unfortunately, again, very, very poor performance from him. I was nearly half expecting him to be taken off at half time, to be honest with you. But come here, and I mean no disrespect by that whatsoever. I just think he's a young goalkeeper, hasn't played at any level really of senior football, so that's kind of showed in the time he's been in the squad. So, I mean, look, it wasn't a bad performance by any stretch, but as I heard, you were talking before there, yourself and Dean were talking. I mean, we've been masters of our own downfall with the two goals again. I mean, they're such avoidable goals. Look, as you said, the game's only one fraction of the story today, but there's quite a lot to get through, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's it. Like we're nearly holding the tide back here. Just everyone's comments in has probably got them all worrying aspects on them. When you look, so we talked about it already, Niall, that the when you look out sometimes, and we concede a very soft free kick for their equaliser. Darrell Horgan's absolutely fuming about it. Poor defending, you would say, on the second one between Pike and Can. Kind of nobody knew who to pick up and which man to go in, and it just left a gap for Mason Mealy in it. But Dara Keane's penalty appeal at the end, it looks a stone wall from every position in Oriel Park, except with the manager, with the referee.
I mean, I didn't even have to look at a replay, Chris, to be honest with you. It's a stone wall of penalty as you're ever going to see in any league, in any country, in any division. You look at the penalties St Pat's got, and I think it was a few weeks ago, a late penalty it was, and the player wasn't touched. And this is not a penalty tonight.
Yeah.
John Daly spoke to us after the game. He even said himself, he spoke to Aaron Bolger himself.
Yeah.
Aaron Bolger could not believe that the referee did not point to the spot for it. He's right in front of the referee. I mean, it's literally like you didn't even need to see a replay. You didn't even need the benefit of replay. It's a stonewall penalty, and I do not know how in any way that can't be a penalty. I don't know. He's been completely upended. the ball hasn't been won. It's a penalty, and it's cost Dundalk 2 points tonight. And poor refereeing. But look, we've been saying this, I suppose, week in, week out in this league. The standard refereeing in this league is absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
And
it's just sad as well because it's
a latest example,
Yeah, but Niall, the play is opening out towards the referee's assistant on that side as well. Like, you really think that's, if everybody else in the park can see it, fair enough, sometimes the referee can see it, but you would have thought between the two referees' assistants that's there, the fourth officials, somebody had to have seen it. And somebody needs to have the guts to kind of say, hang on, you might have got something wrong there, ref. But it's like something you never see in this league is a referee's assistant willing to override a referee and maybe make him think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like common sense, doesn't it, Chris? But like, how none of them can come to the conclusion, like the St Pat's player Bolger himself knows it's a penalty. Can't believe his luck, basically. And John Daly confirmed this much after the game because he spoke to him.
Yeah,
he can't believe it. That's not a penalty. Like, I can't believe it's not a penalty. You can't believe it's not a penalty. Yeah. And the 2,000 whatever plus fans on the ground on both sides can't believe it's not a penalty. But the people who need to be making the decision don't see it. I mean, it's very disheartening because Dundalk, in fairness to them, didn't play badly at all today. Dundalk would have been more than good value for a point in that game on the balance of play. I don't think Pats did enough to win the game, personally speaking. And Dundalk shot themselves in the foot as more so than Pats playing through them and outplaying them or anything like that. I think it was a case of Dundalk being the master of their own downfall, which has been the case many times this year. And that's why Dundalk's bottom of the table, because they've been doing that year in, year out. But tonight they deserve something, I think. And it's disheartening, especially given everything that's kind of floating about the place in recent days as well. It's such a disheartening night in many respects, I have to say.
Just a quick note, because we obviously we opened up tonight and the conversation we were having was about Owen Kenny, the bravery for the goal to get himself in the right position. And Pingu was saying earlier on that if ever there was somebody that needed and wanted that goal, it was Owen, and it was all set up as I said in the introduction for It was the King's return against the Prince. It was all set up against former employers all over the place here tonight. It was all set up lovely, and for Owen to get that first league goal at home as well, that's got to be a massive weight off his shoulders.
Yeah, it's probably one of the few positives tonight. I mean, it's a massive monkey off his back, and the goal's well worked. I was actually talking to somebody in my local pub during the week, and they were saying that Dan Pike's long throws were such a weapon, like, you know what I mean? And that's something we need to be utilising a lot more, because he has this like Rory Delap javelin type throw-in, which we've seen in the last home match, but we've seen it come to fruition today. He lumps in this long throw-in, and I think it's Can who kind of helps it on, Hayden Can, and then Kenny obviously finishes. It's a well-worked goal. That same person, by the way, told me that Mayo and Amasahin should play up front. And I said if he scored a hat-trick, I'd buy runs for the whole pub if that was the case. Luckily, that didn't happen in one respect. But, I mean, it's a well-worked goal. And, it was a perfect start. You're inside 2 minutes there. And it's a perfect start for Dundalk. And it seemed to have lifted everybody. I think even throughout the rest of that half, I mean, barring the goalkeeper's mishaps where we nearly shot ourselves in the foot several times via the goalkeeper, Goddard, we actually probably were the better team in that first half. And look, again, I suppose it is in one sense, it's the same old Dundalk. And I was talking to John Murphy after the game, and it's a case of like, good for one half, basically.
Yeah.
And, Andy Boyle was saying the same to me last week in terms of like, you got to marry that with a 90-minute performance. I mean, it can't just be 45 minutes.
No.
And that's where Dundalk have fallen short in the last two matches at home. Is they've played well for 45 minutes, but not necessarily for the 90. And I don't know what the psychology behind that is, or is it a fatigue issue? I don't know. But it cost them dearly again today. It really did.
Right, Bingo. We done well. We got like 20 minutes out of that match without mentioning the internal doom that seems to be hanging around Oriel Park. It feels like a season of it. I've sat and I've had conversations with yourself too many times around this kitchen table that I'm currently at about the situation in Oriel Park over the past few years. This year, it seemed to be rumour after rumour. We've had a lot go on this week again. We've come to we've had a story leak during the week that Brian Ainscough might be willing to sell this club, that we could be in huge financial issues and trouble right now. Where do we even start on this? I mean, what's your feelings on the whole situation, I suppose?
Where do you even start on it, to be honest?
Yeah.
It's, you obviously said there that this season, but it feels like we haven't been stable since this podcast started in 2021.
Where the jigs?
Yeah, it's been 4 or 5 years coming down the road for us, and maybe even longer. I've been chatting to certain fans quite a lot, and if we focus, what I'll do is actually I'll focus on this season and this week actually, and then we can bring it into a bigger discussion. But yeah, I've obviously, I spoke to you yesterday, Chris, at length on the phone as well about this. I'm kind of, again, I'm a little bit lost for words. I'm trying to kind of manage my words carefully with this as well. But I don't think anybody has ever, and I want to just throw this out because I've seen the current owner, previous owners, seen everyone get thrown under the bus. I don't think anybody took over Dundalk Football Club to fuck it up. And I just want to say that, and that's where my thought is. And if I go on a tangent where I start blaming people, I just want people to know, or where it sounds like I'm blaming people, that's not the intent of it. But I genuinely believe that nobody's taken it over to mess it up. I think Brian Ainscough has bitten off more than he can chew, regards the size of Dundalk Football Club, and that's not trying to be disrespectful to Kerry FC, but you're taking over a completely different animal. I think if you're taking over a club that has aspirations of getting into Europe, you need to have that back in advance. And again, I don't know. I know Brian relatively well, but not well enough that I would know his financial status or anything like that. But at least from what we're hearing and what we've heard throughout the season, there's been statements that's been put out when he's got a round of investment that's came into the club. I believe if you're taking over a football club like Dundalk FC, that investment should have been there in advance. You should do your due diligence. There's obviously this week we're hearing rumours, and again, don't know how true it is, but you're hearing rumours that there's bills that are coming in from last year and previous owners, etc. I'm sure there's an element of truth to that, but again, if you're taking over, a club from someone, you have to do your due diligence on that side. And again, you're hearing that people are saying they withheld this, and maybe they did. We don't know, right? We weren't in the room whenever that deal was done. We don't know what was withheld, what was given out. But if something is being withheld, that's a red flag straight away. If, hypothetically, that is what happened, if certain accounts were not made available, that would be a red flag that would put me off, especially as a Cavan man, a fellow who grew up in Cavan. I wouldn't be parting with my money that way. But, it just feels very... again, I think I said at the start of the show, it's just everything is very sad at the minute. And I feel, and I made a joke earlier about bringing up 2012, and I just feel like we've gone from that great time, but the club got saved, and now we're back in a similar situation for whatever reason, whoever's to blame. But I think we're a lot worse off than we were back then. I think the one thing that we had going for us back then as well, and again, I'm beating a dead horse because I feel like the last time I was on the podcast, I talked about this, when Jerry Matthews was looking to sell, you had the Supporters Trust, you had Save Our Club, you had the Shedside Army, etc. And I know there's people that listen to the podcast that are representatives of the 1903 as well on tonight. And this comment is not meant to be disrespectful to anybody that's involved in that, because I know they do, put in a lot of effort into what they do with the 1903. But for whatever reason, it hasn't captured the imagination of the supporters. And I always look at it, from my perspective. I look at Sligo. Sligo won the league, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was either 2012 or 2013. And they've invested that money back into the club. They've almost sacrificed some instant success. But to me, they're the standard bearers. I know Bohemians like to think they're the standard bearers from the fan-owned model, but Sligo would be who I would look at. They've upped, they've renovated parts of the ground. They've just made everything about their club a little bit better, and I don't think we're there. I like the academy is not where it should be, in my opinion. I think it was in a good place a few years ago, and for whatever reason, over the last couple of years, it feels like it's taken a step back. Oriel Park hasn't been renovated since Jerry Mattes. You know, if we're being honest, like he's the last person that actually done anything cosmetically to Oriel Park to make it somewhat better, and that was back when we were in the first division. And you know, we've won millions of euro, and that's not been invested back into Oriel Park. We've had billion-dollar owners, and that's not been invested. You know, they haven't invested into Oriel Park. I'm not even talking about the Dundalk Football Club at the minute. They haven't invested into Oriel Park, because part of my argument is if people had have invested into Oriel, that's going to bring the investment, because people are going to want to come to Oriel. And you see it tonight, there was 2,200, I think, was called out tonight. Probably 200 or 300 of that was St Pat's fans. So as a club, we're teetering under 2,000 again, which we probably haven't seen since 2012. And that for me is the biggest worry. You know, obviously the numbers were a lot lower in 2012. I think we were below 1,000, but the league has grown. But we're actually the club that I believe has regressed in all that time. I don't think another club, maybe you can make an argument for Drogheda, but I don't think there's a club within the Premier Division that has actually regressed at the level that we have. And the reason why I bring up the supporter stuff as well is there's a level of complacency among supporters that I believe is there, and we've sat and let it happen. And again, I feel like the last time I was on the pod, I brought this up, but it just feels as though we're just prepared to let it happen and wait for someone else to come in and fix it. Like, at what point are we going to come in and fix it? And sorry, I promise I'll stop talking in a couple of minutes and let Niall or yourself, Chris, jump in. But you know, this is almost like the worst and the best time to start looking on the likes of Oriel Web. And for anybody who, you know, obviously listens to the podcast, will probably be mentioning it now on Oriel Web tomorrow. But you listen to it, or I was reading it over the last 48 hours, and people are bringing up about, you know, the lads who protested against Bill and ran Peak 6 out of it, and how they should never have done that, etc. I would be kind of the opinion that had we have had an established supporters group back then, prior to that, when Bill Holsizer was even being muted as being the chairman of Dundalk Football Club, that's when a supporters group can actually express how they're feeling then. You know, I feel like the intent of what the lads were trying to do back then was correct, but I feel like the timing was wrong, if that makes sense. And I feel like, you know, that's something that I feel like the club, or not the club, the supporters of Dundalk Football Club has to get right now. I feel like this is the time where supporters have to get together. And we've gone through 5 years. If we go through 1 year, it's one of those, right? Shame on fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, or whatever it is. I can't even remember what it is. But
what's fooled me 5 times?
Exactly, yeah. But it's happened. Like, you know what I mean? This is the third ownership where we've kind of crashed and burned within the last 5 years. So it just, I feel like, again, like my kind of big thing tonight is supporters need to get together, and they need to formulate something to make sure whatever happens after this, you know, again, I know we'll probably talk about more dire stuff that came out post-match tonight, but whatever happens after this season this has to be a wake-up call for Dundalk fans, that we can't move on potentially from Brian Ainscough to the next person that puts money into Dundalk Football Club. And then what happens in 12 months' time when they get sick of it, when we don't get potentially promoted out of the first division, and they're going to walk, and then we're having the exact same conversation in 12 months' time. You know, I think supporters really need to stand up and be counted, and the best way to do that is for everybody to get together. I don't know if that's true to 1903. I don't know if that's true potentially the entity, myself, yourself, and Stephen Todd talked about, Chris. But there something has to be done. It's again, I've been banging this drum since 2015 that something needed to be done, and here we are almost 10 years later, and we're worse off than we were then. All right, I'm stopping talking now for a few minutes.
Yeah, Bingo hasn't been on all year, so we got all his words out in all at once. Niall, your thoughts on the current situation in Oriel?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Dean's kind of said there. Look, you talk about supporters getting together, and that's what we need to do. But there's a fear now creeping in that it could be too late for that. I mean, it's been confirmed tonight to us in the post-match that, you know, rumours of people not being paid is true. People not being paid at the club, you know, which is deeply worrying. To be honest, and it's not just the playing staff; it applies to all staff at the club. John Daly's confirmed that, and other people at the club have backed it up tonight. So that's perhaps most concerning of all, I'd say. The debt, what's also a factor here is in 2012, and I'm sure Dean's obviously, you obviously remember quite well, the debt, the reported debt now is substantially larger than it was in 2012. And it was hard enough to get in. It was hard enough to get out of it in 2012 as it was. Where do you go from here? I mean, where do you actually go from here? I mean, there is a feeling around the place tonight that we'll do well to field a team in Waterford next week. And that seems to be the feeling around the place, which is a deeply upsetting thought for anyone connected with the club. It's bleak.
We heard before the match that there's due to be a meeting with the PFAI very soon as well. So I mean, that doesn't bode well either.
No, it's extremely bleak. And look, you can point a finger at this person, that person, the other person. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this rot started to creep in a long time ago. And look, people don't need me to tell me where that started. I mean, it's evident where it started. So I think, and it's just been a continuation of the decline since then. Cracks have started to appear every single season, and it's just fallen into further decay every single season. And what you're seeing now is the fallout of just years and years and years of, I suppose, just
neglect. Would you say?
Neglect, one word you could say. I don't think it's. I do agree with Dean in one sense. I think neglect is perhaps unfair to some people. I don't think anybody comes into a club and tries to sabotage it.
No.
Deliberately. You'd like to think people come in with the best intentions to a football club, but then you look at the situation and you're like, I mean, I'm not trying. I mean, no disrespect in what I'm saying here, but like Brian Ainscough was hosting Q&As at the start of the season, and obviously he had a press conference with us and stuff like that. I mean, surely now would be a time to host a Q&A with supporters. I mean, there wasn't really any pressing issues in January or whenever it was called. I mean, Brian Ainscough needs to stand up here and say something. It's not fair, in my view, that John Daly's been... And John Daly, by the way, I just have to commend John Daly. John Daly came out tonight and spoke for about 12, 13 minutes and absolutely was superb. Such a professional, showed great dignity in his post-match and was brutally honest about the state of play. Well, it's not fair that John Daly has to come out. John Daly himself, I'm assuming, if the other hasn't been paid himself, or is awaiting wages that haven't been paid in arrears. So I don't think it's fair that he's been wheeled out, expected to answer these questions, when in fairness to him, he's come into a job which, let's face it, I would say he's mad in the head to come into, to be honest with you. And he's put his reputation on the line. And in my viewpoint, he's actually done a tremendously good job, because a team that was completely doomed actually have, at least on the pitch, have half a chance of staying in the division. So he has to be commended for that. And I think he's conducted himself tremendously throughout this whole process. Where's Brian Ainscough? I mean, he was hosting Q&As at the start of the year when there was no pressing questions, really. You know, people were talking, you know, there was obviously a few things that needed to be talked about. But, and I'm not saying Brian Ainscough's come in and deliberately made a mess of this by any stretch of the imagination. And it's not all his fault, by the way. Obviously, he inherited,
of course,
a pattern or a what's the word I'm looking for? It was like an historic sort of
historical issues,
and legacy issues as they've been put in some reports, you know. So it's not entirely his fault, but I mean, the fact of the matter is, we are where we are, and like, where is he? Where is he? When's he last done an interview with any of the journalists? When's he last held, a press conference? When's he last? Like, now surely it's the perfect opportunity to do a Q&A with the supporters. Sure, it's easy to do it in January when there's no pressing issues before a ball's kicked. Now, and Brian Ainscough rightfully got praised for hosting a Q&A in January because previous owners hadn't done it. So he rightfully got praised for it. But here we are in September with the club.
It's a low bar though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But the club facing now a very real possibility of going under. And surely there's questions to be answered.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Niall. Sorry. I think you've hit the nail on the head because that was one thing that was brought up last year about previous ownership is that they never spoke up, and they didn't speak up at the time when there was rumours of certain issues going on, and that's when they stopped talking. And to your point, you know, Brian came in, and Brian was very honest, I think, in his first Q&A with the supporters as well about the state of Oriel, etc. But now when things are really bad, and whether it's him or Peter Halpin or whoever, he's doing the exact same thing. And again, we need to hold everyone accountable. You know, if even if it's legacy expenses that are owed or whatever, you know, he's also the person at the front of that should be answering. Someone from the club should be.
Yeah. Well, in fairness to Peter Halpin, John Daly did commend Peter Halpin and said Peter Halpin's been tremendous to everybody at the club and tried his best to communicate. And I'm assuming Peter Halpin, as an employee, is also being affected by this. I'm assuming. So I mean, there is that. But John Daly did name check Peter Halpin today and commended him for his conduct throughout this whole process. So I just think now's the time for Brian Ainscough to come out and start giving people information. The fans have a right to know. This is our club. We've a right to know what's going on here. You know, the staff at the club, players, managers, coaches, extra staff alike, are in the dark here about what's going on. So we're obviously in the dark too. Let us know what's happening and how we can, and then we can better. We're in a better position to try and resolve it as a unit. And when I say unit, I mean supporters groups, trusts, wherever wants to be, whatever there is out there, and we can all get together and try and solve or try and begin to fix whatever mess actually unraveled. But until we have a bit of some accountability from those at the top, you're never ever going to get that, and it's just going to fall further and further into disrepair, which it looks like is currently happening. You know, I'm hearing whispers tonight around the place from people that we might even be in Waterford this time next week. You know,
that's scary, and
if that's not deeply concerning to listen to, and I'm not trying to come on here and scaremonger people or frighten people, but this is just the reality of where it seems we are at the moment. And this is not coming from, you know, a fella heard from another fella. This is coming from people who are there every day, working in the place. So I think it's time for Brian Ainscough to step up now and let us know what's going on and let us know the state of play. Obviously, the accounts are going to be released publicly in a matter of weeks anyway. They've already been delayed, by the way, but they are due to be released in due course. And then we'll obviously have official numbers, but there's probably still so much more issue that we're not aware of even then. That, I mean, I just don't know. I mean, Brian Ainscough needs to. I'm not saying it's entirely his fault. It isn't. But there has to be accountability for those at the top. And we just aren't, at the moment, I'm sorry to say, and he did start off well. Dean's right. He did start off well in his ownership, but he has just fallen into this absentee model that previous ownerships fell into because things have gotten tough and questions are going to be asked. And when questions are going to be asked, people run away. And that's, I'm afraid to say, that's what seems to have happened.
Pingu, look, if you're in the shit, I suppose the last thing we want is people in control up in Oriel Park burying their head in their sand here and not filling in supporters, because within that vacuum, like Niall just said, that's where the rumour mill really kicks off and goes into overdrive. So do you feel like at this stage we need some sort of statement from the club at least?
Yeah, I think there has to be. You know, I think to Niall's point, like we just need to have something and let people know. You know, I think, again, and I could be wrong, and I could be kind of remembering history a little bit differently, but I'm pretty sure Jerry Matthews at the time said he was willing to sell the club when he did, and there was a statement released about that. Yeah, and I'm not trying to praise Jerry as being the greatest owner of all time, because I think towards the end, Jerry, you know, Jerry didn't do as good of a job as he did in the early years in his time. But I think, you know, let fans know. And I think when stuff came out about players not being paid back in 2012 as well, you know, say if our club was set up and we made 10 grand in the first couple of weeks that we gave to the club to pay players' wages, that's probably not even paying half the squad nowadays, you know, for a week.
Yeah.
So that's where the scary side of all this comes in, is where is the money going to come from? But, you know, I think I see Andrea is saying, is commenting as well, like, supporters do need to get together. And I think like a good first step as well is, and I know Frank is listening as well, is I think that the 1903 should be releasing a statement, you know, publicly or even privately. They should be requesting an opportunity to speak with Brian on behalf of the supporters and
100%,
you know, and it's a lot easier now than it was a few years ago. He can do it over Zoom with them as well, and he can tell them what they can put out to the fans. He can also say, you know, what's off the record as well. But I think, and maybe it is done privately, and then that correspondence just comes through the 1903 as to what they talk about. I think, you know, there just has to be something. I think at the minute we just don't have, you know, there's nothing at all. There's nothing at all apart from, and it's not even hearsay because a lot of it is coming out as true. You know, that's you know, I think the scary part is obviously the fact that players aren't being paid, and then when you see the PFAI are due to meet, like when the PFAI get involved, then it's definitely a big issue.
Yeah, Niall, and look, you've mentioned it before. You know, the thing we have to remember at this, there are people's lives at stake, their livelihood here at stake. You know, it's not an entity in a football club that can go and come back or whatever. There's real human beings behind a lot of this, and that uncertainty. It's, you know, when you're in the conundrum, I suppose that Dundalk find themselves in the league. This isn't. Last week we probably spent a lot of the podcast comparing ourselves to Drogheda, but if you look at all the positivity coming from their ownership, from their plans, from how the team is performing on the pitch, I mean, that all feeds into it, and we just seem to be in a spiral of negativity here.
It's deeply. It's. I can't. I really feel sorry for. There's a lot of good people up in Oriel Park. I think it's important to identify that. Do you know what I mean? And again, people have bills to pay, mortgages to pay, you know, families to raise, etc. It's not easy. Do you know what I mean? And if you've gone several weeks without, you know, or months even without your wage, like where does that leave you? Like, where does that leave you? Like, I mean, like John Daly confirmed that Brian Ainscough has assured staff at the club that the money will come in sooner rather than later to pay them. But that's just delaying. Like, I mean, like, well, when's the next payment going to come in then? Do you know what I mean? Is it going to be the same process? I mean, this is deeply unfair for people, and, you know, people who still got up and gone to work despite not being paid should commend it as well. At that football club. So I mean, it's just such a sad state of affairs. I mean, I'm nearly at a loss for words at this point, because I mean, it's just, we knew, I think the majority of people knew it was bad. Like, we knew Dundalk weren't flush. Do you know what I mean? Given, I think the evidence has been around all season to suggest that we're not flush, and we don't have, you know, a lot of money to spend. But when the whole thing's starting to unravel now, and you're starting to see the extent of it, it's deeply concerning. And this goes far beyond 2012. It goes far beyond even 2021, when Peak Six kind of, you know, pulled themselves out of that. I think this is deeply concerning now. And like, I mean, like, you'd like to see a very strong statement from the supporters club on this. I think I couldn't agree more with Dean's comment there in terms of requesting a meeting with Brian Ainscough. I think that's that's an absolute necessity. Because, to be honest with you, I don't even think it's good enough for the likes of myself or Jerry Malone or James Rogers, etc., to go up there and talk to Brian Ainscough. I think the fans need to be the ones asking these questions. I think that's a necessity. I think needs to happen. Because if we don't do that, it's just going to these rumors and this cloud of uncertainty is just going to grow more and more legs as the days and weeks progress. Now's the time to do it. I'd like to see something. I'd like to see some sort of comment from Brian Ainscough or something in the next few days. I think we all would, because it's not fair on supporters. I'm sure many listening to this tonight now, it's not fair. And reading the reports as well of what's going on. It's not fair that everyone's kind of in this cloud of uncertainty and this vacuum. Yeah.
Bingo. Look, I suppose there's like you've said about the differences between 2012 and now, you know, in the levels of debt and everything else. But do you see? And the reason I say this is because I know from chatting to you and other people who were on the or were members of Save Our Club back then, how close it really got that time. And that was a scary situation. Can you see a similar path opening up here right now, or do you fear it's worse?
I definitely fear it's worse because the wage bill is a lot higher than it was back in 2012. You know, I think the wage budget was less than 10 grand per week back then.
It was quite low, yeah.
Yeah, so we're nowhere near that. Like, it absolutely eclipses it. But again, you know, there was like I said, I'm sorry that I keep harping on about supporters groups, one of my favorite topics, but you know, you've got, as I say, you've got the 1903 now, and they're not getting the support that the trust had at the time. Like, the trust had developed a big bank account, or a relatively big bank account, over years in the build up to that. We don't have a group that has built up bank, you know, built up stuff in their bank account up until then. Then we also did have Save Our Club, and we raised a significant amount in a short space of time. But I was just thinking while Niall was talking there, we set up, I think it was the end of June that year. We're now in September, you know, so we had a 2 month head start on 2 or 3 month head start on where we are right now as well, to be able to do that. The biggest concern for me is the fact, well, two things: the fact that John Daly has come out and said that they're not getting paid, or that they haven't been paid. I know he said they will get paid, but to Niall's point, is that kicking the can down the road for the next week that they're not getting paid, you know? And I'm not sure if it's still a rule, but I know the PFAI back in 2012, if you miss 2 weeks wages, you go into receivership. So
yeah.
If they don't get paid now 2 weeks in a row, we'll go into receivership. And that was one of the things that sprung Save Our Club into action. Like, again, thankfully I was kind of on the inside, so I had a good relationship with Paul Johnson. I was still doing my role as club promotion officer unpaid because I had been let go during that time. So I had a little bit more inside knowledge into what was happening within the club at the time. I don't know if anybody has that anymore. Like, I think that seems to be the overriding thing as well, you know, that maybe even, as Niall said, Peter Halpin might not even know the extent of where we're at financially in that now, you know. So I just, to answer your question, I fear that we are kind of a little bit further down the road than we were when it got really bad in 2012. And, you know, when you're hearing rumours or when you're hearing stuff from people, you know, very closely to the club, like Niall said, that Waterford might not go ahead next week. I don't think we had ever got to that point. And even this week, there was a couple of stuff was put out on Tuesday that tonight might not have gone ahead at one stage. So that's where I'm more concerned. I don't think in 2012, and I could be wrong again, but I don't think that was ever brought up back then.
Yeah, Niall, from your own point of view, like, and I suppose with your journalistic hat on, like, do you feel that what we're hearing and what the fans are getting is just the crest of a wave on this? There's a lot more to come. Like, do you feel that this has, you know, I don't want to be you know, kind of doom mongering or anything on this, but like, has this got the potential to put a nail in the coffin of Dundalk Football Club?
It's really hard to say. At this moment in time, I think it's really hard to say, Chris. I mean, you'd like to think the answer to that is no. You'd like to think that, you know, we can bounce it, we can come out of this and rise from the ashes again, as we've done so many times in our checkered history. It's a big club. It's got a big fan base. It's got a big support behind it. I mean, there is that, and I mean that's one thing that works in our favour. Is the interest level in the club. I mean, this has technically been my week off this week, and all people have spoken to me about is the Dundalk Football Club and what's going on, and it just shows how big the club actually is. Do you know what I mean, in this town? So I would like to think that it's not necessarily the end of the Dundalk Football Club, but it's certainly the beginning of a much more, I suppose, diluted version. And that's best case scenario. I think, like, first division next season, relegation is probably best case scenario now, really. Because let's face it, if we do stay up on the pitch, the chances of getting a Premier Division license, I'd say, are practically slim to none, based on what we've seen, unless something happens dramatically overnight, which it did in 2012, of course. But that's not going to happen you can't keep getting out of jail like that, You can't. And as Dean has referenced, the debt is far more substantial than it was, and the wage bill as well, and things like that are far more substantial. The league's changed, as you're right to say. You're right in saying the league's changed. The landscape has changed. Football in this country has changed, and sadly, it looks like we're just another club that's flown too close to the sun. And I think Thursday night football, it's something that it could be best case scenario next year in the first division, back Thursday nights at Oriel Park. I mean, it's looking quite bleak. It's looking very, very bleak at the moment. So, I mean, hopefully, look, the only hope we can hold is that something comes out in the next couple of days that's more positive. I mean, I know Jerry Malone was reporting that there is interested parties in the club, but whether they're aware of the actual, skeletons that have been left behind is another matter. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of rumor. The rumor mill is going to be an overload, I think, in the coming weeks. But that's why the clubs need to come out with an official line. They need to come out with an official line on this. So yeah, let's wait and see.
Yeah, look, we could go round and round in circles and still not solve this whole crisis. Like Pingu, just before we go, I suppose, what do you feel coming into this weekend? It's a pivotal time for us now. We're not playing football, so now is the time to concentrate on off the field matters. What does the club need to do?
Yeah, I think first thing first, like I'll go back to supporters again. I think Maxi just said, the 1903 needs to call a public meeting ASAP, which I think is something that should be done, and get as many fans to that, whether that's publicly in person, publicly virtually, whatever. But I think, there has to be something that mobilizes all the supporters, whether they're Maxi said 1904, he's forming a new supporters club there, but I think it means 1903. But get everybody together, and even if they're non-members of 1903, this is now their opportunity, I think, to get that, like I said, for whatever reason they just haven't caught the attention of the wider support base. This is an opportunity now to do it, because I think every supporter is in line as, like, we're in a dire position now, and if we want to support Dundalk Football Club, say if our club was set up to make sure that we didn't become Dundalk Forest Co-op, I don't think anybody wants to become that this time around either. And I don't know if getting all the fans on side now will even save that from happening. But I think getting fans on side to make sure that somewhere down the road that this doesn't become an issue, moving forward in years to come, I think is something that has to be done. And I think getting a group together, or getting a meeting together has to be done, and ask questions and ask directly to speak to Brian Ainscough. I think that's the biggest thing, and hopefully through the supporters then we'll be able to get some idea of the severity of the situation.
Yeah, look, Niall, I presume the same for you. One or two people just asking about the potential investors. I'm sure you probably don't know any more than we do.
Look, come here. Yeah, I mean, in fairness, if I'm being truthfully honest with you, I've heard rumours even going back several months that there was, at least one investor or one potential takeover being mooted, because there has been, I suppose it's been street knowledge at least that Brian Ainscough has probably wanted to part ways with his investment. For this isn't just a recent, decision. I'm sure he's made. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure he's been thinking about it. He must have uncovered whatever he's uncovered in the documents and not liked what he's seen or whatever. But I mean, I can't say I've got any sort of inkling into who might be coming in. I mean, there's no. Look, I'm sure there is interest. The question is, what's the level of that interest? Because I mean, I wouldn't spoof you and say I know, because as John Daly said to us before the press conference even started tonight, he said maybe you can tell me something, because he's just as clueless at the moment as to what's happening. And I think that's what's kind of leaving everybody a little bit frustrated, is that we don't know anything really. But we do know enough to know that we're basically up shit creek without a paddle as it stands. And I mean, look, a Phoenix club might sound a bit, over the top, but it could be our only viable option at this point. And will that club even get a first division license? I mean, these are all questions that are continuously going to be asked over the coming days and weeks. So I can't reiterate enough, we need an official line from somebody, because you can't leave fans, supporters of this club in the dark. Because if history's taught us anything, they won't tolerate it for too long. So we need to see something happen.
Yeah, look, apologies to everyone else. I've kind of abandoned our man of the match competition just because I feel there's far more important matters that we needed to get discussed tonight. Really appreciate Niall and Pingu jumping on tonight. Look, I think the main thing here is that we need clarity from the club right now of the situation we're in, just so everyone is aware exactly where we are. We need some sort of mobility between the fans to ensure we don't get back into this situation again. This can't be another lesson another situation that we don't take a lesson from. And I think actions speak louder than words right now, and that's what's needed. So look, we'll be back as always after our next game. We'll get a little bit of a break, and we'll be back to hopefully our usual more upbeat, and we're giving away pizzas galore from then on. But thanks for everyone for joining in tonight. Thanks, lads, for the contributions, and until next time, come on down.